My name's Tyler, and I've always thought of myself as a pretty regular guy. Nothing flashy, nothing over the top. I work a decent job in construction management, and my wife, Ashley, stays home with our two kids, Ethan, who's 8, and Sophie, who's 6. We've been married for 11 years, and life's been a steady routine. Work, family dinners, soccer practices, bedtime stories, the whole suburban deal. I won't lie and say we were living a fairy tale, but who really is? We had our ups and downs like any other couple. Sure, Ashley could be demanding at times, and I had my moments of frustration, but I always chalked it up to the stress of raising kids and managing a household. She had this fiery personality. Sometimes it was fun, other times exhausting, but I figured that was just part of her charm. Looking back, there were signs I probably should have seen, but at the time, I didn't. Ashley had started to act different, though not in a way I could put my finger on. She got a gym membership about 6 months ago, saying she wanted to feel better about herself. I thought it was great. Who wouldn't want their spouse to feel good and healthy? She started dressing a little nicer, too, but again, I figured she was just rediscovering herself after years of mom mode. Then there was the phone. She'd always had it glued to her hand, but recently it seemed like she guarded it with her life. I remember joking about it once, saying, "What? You running the CIA on that thing?" She laughed it off and said something about Pinterest boards and gossip with her friends. I didn't press her. Why would I? Our intimacy had cooled a bit over the last year, but that didn't strike me as odd. With 2 kids, work stress, and everything else, it's not exactly the honeymoon phase anymore. Besides, she'd always been a little moody, so I figured her distance was just part of her personality. Things really started to feel off when she began going out more, girls' nights, she called them. She'd say it was just her and a few of her old friends hitting a wine bar or catching a movie. I'd stay home with the kids, make popcorn, and watch cartoons with them. I never questioned her about it. I trusted her completely, but now, as I sit here reflecting on it, I can't believe how blind I was. How much I didn't want to see. It was a Friday evening, and the day had been exhausting. Work had dragged on with endless meetings, and I was looking forward to nothing more than kicking back on the couch with the kids. Ethan wanted to build a Lego tower, and Sophie had already pulled out a stack of picture books for me to read. Ashley had told me earlier that she had plans with her friends again. She kissed the kids goodbye, barely glanced at me, and then was out the door, looking more dressed up than usual. She wore a fitted black dress, heels that clicked confidently against the hardwood floor, and a perfume so strong it lingered long after she left. I remember teasing her, "You're making the rest of us look like slobs." She gave me one of her tight smiles, the kind that didn't reach her eyes, and said, "Don't wait up." Something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me, but I shook it off. I wasn't the jealous type, and Ashley had always been the kind of woman who loved attention. She craved admiration in a way I could never fully understand, but I figured it was harmless. The kids and I spent the evening laughing, playing, and eventually winding down. By 9:30 p.m., they were asleep, and I was left alone in the quiet house. That's when the nagging feeling started. It wasn't anything concrete, just this odd sense that something was off. Maybe it was the way Ashley had brushed me off earlier, or maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me after a long week. I tried to ignore it, flipping through TV channels and scrolling on my phone, but the feeling only grew. Around 10:30 p.m., I texted Ashley, just a casual, "Hope you're having fun. What time do you think you'll be home?" The message sat there, unread. An hour passed, then another. Midnight rolled around, and my unease had morphed into something heavier. I texted her again, "Everything okay?" Still no response. It wasn't like Ashley to ignore me for this long, even on her nights out. I debated calling, but something held me back. Pride, maybe, or not wanting to come across as overbearing. Then, around 12:30 p.m., I decided to take a drive. It wasn't a planned thing. I just grabbed my keys and walked out the door, thinking maybe some fresh air would clear my head. The streets were quiet, lit by the soft glow of streetlights, and I aimlessly drove around town, not even sure what I was looking for. But then I saw it. Her car. It was parked in the lot of a small, dimly lit motel on the edge of town. The kind of place where you wouldn't stop unless you had no other options. My chest tightened. my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe she had car trouble and pulled in there to call someone. Maybe she was meeting a friend who needed help. But deep down, I knew. I parked on the street, heart pounding, and walked toward the motel. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through wet cement, but I kept moving, one step at a time. The sight that greeted me through the window of room 14 will never leave me. Ashley was there, tangled in the sheets with a man I didn't recognize. He was younger than me, lean and cocky-looking, with tattoos up and down his arms. She was laughing, her head thrown back, completely unaware that her entire world was about to crash down. I froze. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing, like it was some twisted scene out of a bad movie. My first instinct was to storm in, to rip the door off its hinges and demand answers. But instead, I just stood there, rooted to the spot, a strange calm washing over me. Eventually, I turned and walked back to my car. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the dashboard, my mind replaying the image over and over again. I didn't cry. Not then. I didn't feel angry, either. I just felt numb. When I finally drove home, the house was silent, except for the faint snores of my kids upstairs. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, watching as Ashley's text finally came through at 2:15 a.m. "Sorry, babe, just leaving now. Had a great time with the girls. Love you." I didn't respond. The morning after that hellish discovery, I woke up feeling like I'd been run over by a freight train. My body was heavy, my mind a tangled mess of disbelief and fury. The sound of the kids playing in the living room barely registered through the fog in my head. For a few seconds, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding as the images from last night replayed in my mind. When I finally pulled myself out of bed, every step toward the kitchen felt like dragging a boulder. Ashley was already there, standing by the counter with her coffee, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. That calm, casual demeanor of hers, like she had nothing to hide, only made the anger boiling inside me burn hotter. She glanced up and flashed me one of those fake, practiced smiles that used to fool me. "Morning," she chirped, her voice sickeningly sweet. "You're up late. The kids have been asking for you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words were caught in my throat, buried under the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Betrayal, rage, humiliation. How could she act like everything was normal? How could she stand there so calm after what I'd seen? "Did you have fun last night?" I blurted out, my voice harsher than I intended. She barely flinched, her eyes flicking back to her phone. "Yeah, it was nice catching up with the girls. We stayed out a little later than planned, but you know how it is." She shrugged, sipping her coffee like nothing was wrong. "How about you? Did you and the kids have a good night?" I clenched my fists, trying to steady myself, but it was no use. The anger was spilling over, too much to contain. "Cut the crap, Ashley. I'm not in the mood for this. Who were you really with?" That got her attention. She set her coffee down, her expression shifting slightly, though she was quick to recover. "What are you talking about, Tyler? I told you. I was with the girls. Why are you being so weird this morning?" I took a step closer, my voice rising despite myself. "Don't you dare lie to me again. I saw your car, Ashley. At the motel. You think I wouldn't notice? You think I wouldn't find out?" Her face froze for just a second, a flicker of panic crossing her features before she plastered on that same fake innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice a little sharper now. "My car wasn't at any motel. You must have seen someone else's." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and ugly. "Don't insult my intelligence. I saw you, Ashley. I saw you with him. So drop the act." Her eyes narrowed, and just like that, the mask came off. "Fine," she snapped, her tone laced with venom. "Yeah, I was at the motel. And so what? You're not exactly a prize yourself, Tyler. You're always working, always stressed. Do you even remember the last time you looked at me like I was more than just the mother of your kids?" Her words hit me like a slap, but they didn't hurt the way she probably intended. They just fueled the fire already raging inside me. "You're really going to stand there and blame me?" After everything I've done for this family, for you? You have the nerve to throw this back in my face? She crossed her arms, her posture defiant. Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. Did you ever think about that? Maybe if you actually paid attention to me. Enough. I roared, my voice echoing through the kitchen. I was shaking now, barely able to keep myself from smashing something. Don't you dare try to make this my fault. You did this. You destroyed our family, not me. Just then, Ethan ran into the kitchen, clutching a crayon drawing in his little hands. Look, Daddy, he said excitedly, completely oblivious to the tension. It's us at the park. I forced myself to kneel down, my anger momentarily shoved to the side. That's amazing, buddy, I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. You're such a talented artist. He grinned and ran off to show his sister, leaving Ashley and me in a silence so heavy it felt like it would crush me. I straightened up and looked at her, my jaw tight. We're not doing this here. Not in front of the kids. She didn't respond, just grabbed her coffee and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind her. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the empty space where she'd been. My mind was racing, my chest heaving, the realization sinking in deeper with every passing second. There was no coming back from this. Not for us. The days that followed the confrontation were like living in a pressure cooker. Every second was steeped in an unbearable mix of rage and disbelief. My thoughts spun relentlessly, bouncing between memories of us laughing as a family and the grotesque reality of what I had seen that night. I'd always thought I could read Jessica, that I knew her well enough to sense even the slightest shift in her, but clearly, I'd been living in a fool's paradise. What made it worse was her nerve. Jessica walked around the house like nothing had happened, as if she wasn't the very reason our world was crumbling. She'd smile at the kids, chat about the weather, even complain about the Wi-Fi, while I was burning inside. I couldn't look at her without my blood boiling. She had the audacity to act like I was the one disrupting her peaceful little bubble. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, I cornered her in the kitchen. I couldn't hold it in anymore. What's your plan here, Jessica? I asked, my voice rough and uneven, like a pot ready to boil over. Are you just going to keep pretending everything's fine while you run around behind my back? She didn't even flinch. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and gave me that infuriating smirk. You're so dramatic, Tyler, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. I told you, it's not what you think. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I wanted to punch the wall, to do something to release the storm raging in me, but I held back. Blowing this out of proportion? I practically spat. I caught you with another man, Jessica. How much clearer does it have to get? Her response was a dagger to the heart. She shrugged, as if I just accused her of forgetting to take out the trash. You don't know the full story, she said coolly. You don't even try to understand what's been missing in this marriage. All you do is work, Tyler. Work, eat, sleep. You stopped seeing me a long time ago. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was standing there, caught red-handed, and somehow twisting this into my failure? My voice shook as I replied, I've been working my ass off to give this family a good life. Everything I've done has been for you and the kids, and now you're telling me that wasn't enough? She rolled her eyes, like my anger was just an inconvenience to her. You don't get it, and you never will, she snapped. You're so stuck in your little world that you don't even see the cracks in what we have. Maybe if you paid attention for once, you'd understand why Don't you dare. I cut her off, my voice breaking under the weight of my anger. Don't you dare try to justify this. You don't get to turn this on me. You made the choice, Jessica. You betrayed us. Her face hardened, her defenses kicking in. I made the choice because I was alone in this marriage, Tyler, she hissed. You left me alone. That was it. I couldn't take any more. I walked out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind me, and sat in the dark living room. My fists clenched so tight they hurt. Her words played over and over in my head, but none of them made sense. She was rewriting history, painting herself as the victim while I was left trying to pick up the shattered pieces of what I thought was a solid foundation. For the first time, I wasn't sure if there was anything left worth saving. I couldn't take it anymore. The walls of the house felt like they were closing in, the air thick with tension and anger that couldn't find a release. Every time I tried to process what had happened, or what was still happening, I'd hit a wall of frustration. Jessica's audacity, her complete refusal to take responsibility, her casual lies. It all made my blood boil. I needed to get out of that house, even if it was just for a few hours. So I grabbed my jacket and left without saying a word. The kids were already in bed, and Jessica didn't even ask where I was going. Maybe she didn't care, or maybe she was relieved I was leaving her alone for a while. Either way, I didn't look back. The bar was only a few blocks away, a dimly lit spot where the locals went to drown their sorrows or catch a game. I hadn't been there in years. It wasn't exactly my scene. I'd always preferred spending my evenings at home with the kids or working late to make sure we were secure. But that night, I needed the anonymity. I needed a place where I could just sit, think, and try to forget about the wreckage of my marriage, even if only for a little while. I slid onto a stool at the far end of the bar, away from the small clusters of people chatting and laughing. The bartender, a guy named Dave I vaguely remembered from high school, gave me a nod. "What'll it be?" he asked. "Whiskey." "Neat," I muttered, barely meeting his eyes. He poured the drink and set it in front of me without a word, like he could tell I wasn't in the mood for small talk. I appreciated that. The first sip burned, but it was a welcome distraction from the fire already raging inside me. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the amber liquid in my glass and letting the low hum of the bar drown out my thoughts. A few more sips, and I started to feel a little lighter, like the weight of everything was loosening its grip. For the first time in days, I wasn't completely consumed by anger or heartbreak, but peace was fleeting. It started with a familiar laugh, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. I froze, my hand tightening around the glass as I turned toward the entrance. And there she was, Jessica. She walked into the bar like she owned the place, her head held high, her laugh echoing in the room. And she wasn't alone. A man followed close behind her, his hand resting casually on the small of her back. He was tall, dressed far too well for a rundown spot like this. His posture screamed confidence, and the way he leaned slightly toward Jessica, speaking low enough to draw her in, made my blood run cold. She tilted her head back in laughter, resting a hand on his arm like they were sharing some private joke. She didn't even glance around, didn't even care to check her surroundings. Or maybe she knew I was there and didn't care. Either way, it was a scene I couldn't unsee. She hadn't even waited for things to settle at home. If anything, she'd escalated the chaos. My chest tightened as a mix of fury and betrayal surged through me. This wasn't just a misstep or a mistake. This was a deliberate slap in the face. I clenched my fists, the glass of whiskey forgotten on the counter. I told myself to stay put, to let it go for now and deal with her later. But as I sat there, watching her lean into him, smiling like nothing in the world mattered, the fire inside me grew. Every laugh, every touch, every casual glance between them fanned the flames until I couldn't sit still any longer. Before I even realized what I was doing, I was on my feet, weaving through the crowd toward them. She saw me coming at the last second, her laughter faltering as her eyes met mine. There was no surprise there, just a flicker of annoyance, as if my presence was an inconvenience to her evening. The words spilled out of me before I could stop them, sharp and cutting, every ounce of the anger I'd been holding back bubbling to the surface. I demanded to know what she thought she was doing, here of all places, with him of all people. My voice was loud enough to draw the attention of the bar's patrons, but I didn't care. Jessica didn't back down. She squared her shoulders, her lips curving into that infuriating smirk that had become all too familiar in recent weeks. She threw out excuses, claiming it wasn't what it looked like, that I was blowing things out of proportion. Her words were hollow, her tone defensive and dismissive, and it only fueled my rage. The man beside her finally decided to step in, placing a hand on Jessica's shoulder and telling me to calm down. His voice was smooth, too calm for the situation, and it grated against my already raw nerves. The way he looked at me, like I was some irrational intruder, was the last straw. Without thinking, without planning, I swung. My fist connected with his jaw, the sound sharp and final. The bar erupted into chaos around us, gasps and shouts filling the air, but I barely heard any of it. The man stumbled back, clutching his face, and Jessica let out a scream, her voice shrill and accusatory. I didn't wait to see what happened next. The fire inside me had turned into a cold, steely resolve. I turned on my heel and walked out of the bar, ignoring the noise and the stares. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands shaking with a mix of adrenaline and fury. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I knew there was no going back. This was the moment that shattered whatever fragile hope I'd been clinging to. Jessica wasn't just reckless or careless. She was cruel, and I couldn't keep holding on to something so broken. After the confrontation at the bar, I knew there was no salvaging anything. The woman I once knew, or thought I knew, wasn't just gone. She had never been there. What I had been clinging to was an illusion, and that realization hit harder than anything else ever could. I spent the next few days in a haze, torn between anger and sadness, but also strangely numb. The house, which had once been filled with life, felt hollow. The kids were at my parents' place, safe from the chaos, which gave me the quiet I needed to think. Yet, the silence only echoed all the things I didn't want to face. Jessica tried reaching out, texts, calls, even showing up at the house. Each time, it was more of the same. Denials, excuses, shifting blame. At first, I thought about engaging, about confronting her again, but what was the point? Nothing she said mattered anymore. Her words had become meaningless, like noise in the background of a life I no longer recognized. I reached out to a lawyer that week. Filing for divorce was a decision I didn't make lightly, but it was also the only choice I had left. I couldn't imagine staying in a marriage where betrayal had taken root and trust had been shattered beyond repair. More importantly, I couldn't raise my kids in a home where resentment would have been the only constant. The process of separating our lives was messy, as I'd expected it to be. Jessica fought tooth and nail over everything, from the house to custody arrangements. Her accusations were wild and baseless, a desperate attempt to paint herself as the victim. I could see through it all, but that didn't make it any easier. Every argument, every snide remark, chipped away at the remnants of my patience. What kept me going were the kids. They didn't deserve this. I refused to let them become pawns in the battle between Jessica and me. I worked hard to ensure they felt loved and secure, even when everything else was falling apart. I didn't badmouth their mother in front of them, no matter how tempting it was. They'd figure out the truth on their own someday, but that wasn't my burden to place on their young shoulders. The divorce was finalized months later. Standing in that courtroom, hearing the judge declare our marriage officially over, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that the chaos was finally ending, and sorrow for what could have been, for the dreams that had died along with our relationship. Moving on wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of it all felt unbearable, when the anger and hurt bubbled up, threatening to drown me. But there were also moments of clarity, of hope. Slowly, I started rebuilding my life. I found comfort in my children's laughter, in the small victories of each day. I learned to be kinder to myself, to stop blaming myself for her choices. What happened wasn't my fault, and carrying that guilt around would only hold me back. I focused on being the best father I could be, on creating a stable and loving home for my kids. Looking back, I realized how much I had grown through the pain. It wasn't a journey I would have chosen, but it shaped me in ways I never expected. If there's one thing I've taken away from all of this, it's that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that set you free. To anyone who finds themselves in a similar situation, my advice is simple: trust yourself. You deserve honesty, respect, and love. Real love, not the kind that comes with conditions or deceit. As for Jessica, I don't think about her much anymore. She became a chapter in my story, one that's closed now. My focus is on the future, on my kids, on finding peace, and on living a life that's full of the things that truly matter.